Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Deep Dive. You guys know how much we love getting your requests, and today's episode is no different. We're diving into a topic many of you have been asking about, the connection between cancer and the cell cycle.
It's a big one, that's for sure. But I think we've got some great stuff to unpack today.
Yeah, and to help us do that, we're looking at this really interesting scientific article, Genetics, Cancer Cell Cycle Phases. It's pretty dense, but super interesting. So maybe before we get into what can go wrong, you can give us a little crash course, like the cell cycle for beginners.
Okay, so picture this. A cell gets a signal, kind of like a green light, telling it to divide and make a copy of itself. But this process, it's not just a free-for-all. Everything is very controlled, like a carefully organized factory production line.
Okay, I like that. So tell me more about this production line. What are the steps?
So first, the cell needs to prepare for this big event, right? It's got to gather all the materials, get the space ready, that sort of thing. So during this stage, which we call the G1 phase, the cell grows in size, takes in nutrients, and importantly, it replicates its DNA.
Ah, so it's making a copy of the instruction manual.
Exactly. Got to have those instructions for making a new cell. Then we move into the S phase. And this is where DNA replication takes center stage. It's absolutely critical to make sure each new cell gets a complete and accurate copy of those instructions.
Right, because if the instructions are messed up, then the new cell won't function properly.
Exactly. And once the DNA is all duplicated, the cell moves into, you guessed it, the G2 phase. Think of it like a quality control checkpoint before the main event.
Okay, so it's double-checking everything, making sure it's ready for the split.
Exactly. During G2, the cell is like, okay, is the DNA okay? Do we have enough of everything? Are we good to go? It's basically making sure that it can divide into two healthy daughter cells.
Wow, it's amazing how much precision goes into this whole process, like a perfectly choreographed dance.
Absolutely. And when it works, it's beautiful. This intricate dance is what keeps our bodies functioning. But like any good performance, things can go off script.
And that brings us to cancer, right? When the cells go rogue.
Exactly. Cancer is essentially a breakdown of that regulation we were just talking about. It's when cells decide to ignore all the rules, skip the checkpoints, and just start dividing uncontrollably.
So instead of a carefully choreographed dance, it becomes more like a mosh pit of cells.
That's a great way to put it. These rogue cells are multiplying without any regard for the cells around them, gobbling up resources, just causing chaos in our tissues and organs.
And the article points to mutations as a major culprit in this whole cellular chaos. So for those of us who need a little refresher, can you break down what mutations are and how they disrupt the cell cycle?
Sure, remember those DNA instructions we talked about? Mutations are like typos in those instructions.
Okay, so typos in the instruction manual. Got it.
Sometimes these typos are minor and they don't really cause any problems, but other times they can be bad news, like changing the instructions in a way that completely throws off how the cell is supposed to behave.
So even a single typo can mess up the whole production line.
Exactly. And these mutations can affect the specific genes that are responsible for controlling things like cell growth and division. So what should be a controlled process can turn into a runaway train.
And one of the things that really jumped out at me in this article was this thing called, and correct me if I'm saying wrong, telomerase. What is that, and why is it such a big deal when we're talking about cancer?
Ah, telomerase. Yeah, that's where it gets really interesting.
Okay, so you were saying telomerase, something about telomerase being interesting.
Right. So imagine our DNA, right? Like those shoelaces we were talking about earlier. And think about those little plastic tips at the end, the ones that stop the shoelaces from fraying. Those tips are kind of like telomeres. They protect our chromosomes, which is where our DNA is stored, from sort of degrading every time a cell divides.
Ah, okay, so the telomeres are protecting the DNA like a bodyguard.
Exactly. But here's the thing. In normal cells, those telomeres, they actually get a little shorter every time a cell divides. Like imagine the plastic tip wearing down a little bit over time. And eventually they get so short that the cell can't divide anymore. It's like it reaches its natural lifespan.
Okay, that makes sense. It's like a built-in expiration date for our cells.
Mm-hmm.
So how does this telomerase thing fit in?
Well, cancer cells, they're tricky. They've actually figured out how to kind of hijack the system. They can reactivate an enzyme called telomerase, which basically rebuilds those telomeres, keeps them nice and long.
So they found a way to cheat, to keep their chromosomes from shortening and basically become immortal.
Exactly, and that's a big part of why cancer cells can just keep dividing and dividing uncontrollably. They've bypassed this really fundamental mechanism of aging.
Wow, that's both incredible and a little terrifying. But it's not like our bodies are totally defenseless, right? The article also mentions something called tumor suppressor genes. What are those all about?
Ah, yes, tumor suppressor genes. Think of them like the guardians, the security guards of our cellular world. They're constantly on patrol, monitoring everything, making sure things are running smoothly. And if they spot any trouble, they step in.
Okay, so they're like the immune system of the cell cycle, always on the lookout for threats.
That's a great way to put it. And one of the most important tumor suppressor genes, probably one you've even heard of, is P53.
Oh, yeah. P53, that rings a bell.
Yeah.
It seems like that one comes up a lot when talking about cancer. Why is it so important?
Well, P53 is like the ultimate multitasker. It plays this really crucial role in maintaining the integrity of our DNA and regulating cell division. And so if it detects any damage to the DNA, whether it's something minor that happened during replication or even a full-blown mutation, P53 can initiate a bunch of different responses.
Like what kinds of things can P53 actually do?
So it can be like, okay, let's get this fixed. It can initiate DNA repair, like a repair crew coming in to fix a pothole in the road. Or if the damage is too bad, P53 can actually hit the pause button on the whole cell division process, buy some time for the cell to repair itself. And then if things are really bad, P53 can even trigger what we call programmed cell death, or apoptosis.
Whoa, so P53 has options: repair, put things on hold, or just eliminate the problem altogether. It sounds like a pretty powerful weapon against cancer.
It really is. But, and this is a big but, these tumor suppressor genes like P53, they can be damaged themselves by mutations.
Oh, right. So it's like the security guard getting taken out, which
Oh.
leaves the cell vulnerable to all sorts of problems.
Yeah, exactly. And that's when things can spiral out of control. When those crucial safeguards are compromised, the chances of a cell becoming cancerous, well, they go way up.
It all seems to come back to these mutations and how they disrupt that delicate balance of the cell cycle.
Absolutely, you're getting it. And often it actually takes more than one mutation to really tip the scales towards cancer.
Is that what the two-hit hypothesis is all about? The article mentioned it, but I wasn't entirely sure what it meant.
Yes, exactly. Think about it like a car, right? Some cars need two keys to start. If you have one key and the other part of the ignition is broken, it's not going to start. It's the same idea here. A single mutation, it might increase your risk of cancer, but it often takes a second hit to a different gene to fully disable the cell's control mechanisms and allow the cancer to develop.
That's such a helpful analogy. So just because you inherit a gene that makes you more susceptible to cancer doesn't necessarily mean you're destined to get it. It's those second hits, which could be from lifestyle choices, environmental factors, even just bad luck, that can really tip the scales.
You got it, 100%. And that's why understanding your family history, knowing if you have any genetic predispositions can be so important.
Right, so it really is this complex interplay of nature and nurture. Our genes might load the gun, so to speak, but it's often our environment that pulls the trigger. So knowing all of this, how does it change how we think about treating cancer?
Yeah, that's a really good point. So if cancer is all about cells dividing out of control, how do our current treatments like chemotherapy actually work?
Well, a lot of it comes down to the fact that cancer cells, they divide so quickly, right? That's actually one of their weaknesses. So many chemotherapy drugs are designed to target those rapidly dividing cells. They basically mess up the machinery that the cells need to copy themselves. So is it kind of like a scorched earth approach, just trying to take out as many of those quickly dividing cells as possible?
In a way, yes. And while that can be effective in shrinking tumors and getting rid of some of those cancer cells, it also affects other healthy cells in our bodies that divide quickly too. Like the cells in our hair follicles, that's why people lose their hair, or in our bone marrow and digestive system, which can cause nausea and fatigue.
Right, makes sense. Like trying to get rid of weeds by just, I don't know, dumping a bunch of weed killer on everything. It might work, but you're going to damage other plants in the process. So how do we get around that? The article mentions something about new treatments called targeted therapies. What are those all about?
Targeted therapies are really interesting. Instead of that broad approach, imagine like a sniper rifle. We're trying to be much more precise, targeting specific molecules or pathways that are really important for the survival of the cancer cells, but not so much for healthy cells.
Oh, so instead of going after every cell that divides quickly, we're zeroing in on the actual bad guys. That makes a lot more sense. How does that actually work?
Well, there are a bunch of different types of targeted therapies, and they all work in different ways. Some of them might block the signals that tell the cancer cells to grow and divide. Others might try to cut off the blood supply to the tumor, basically starving it. And then there's immunotherapy, that's a whole other fascinating area.
Yeah, immunotherapy has been getting a lot of attention lately. What's so special about it?
Well, our immune systems are really incredible, right? They're designed to fight off all kinds of invaders. But cancer cells are sneaky. They've evolved all these ways to hide from and even suppress our immune defenses. Immunotherapy is kind of like it's like taking the brakes off our immune system. It helps our bodies to recognize those cancer cells and fight them off more effectively.
So we're essentially giving our bodies a boost, helping our natural defenses do what they're supposed to do.
Exactly. And what's really exciting about immunotherapy is that for some people, it's not just about shrinking the tumor in the short term, it can actually lead to long-lasting remission, even for some really advanced cancers.
Wow, that's incredible. It really feels like we're entering this whole new era of cancer treatment. It's pretty amazing.
Hmm.
But for all this talk about treatment, I think it's important to remember that prevention is key, right? What are some things people can do to lower their risk of getting cancer in the first place?
Oh, absolutely. Prevention is huge. And, it's not always about complicated medical procedures. A lot of it comes down to the choices we make every day.
Like what? What are the big ones?
Well, not smoking is huge. I know everyone's heard it before, but smoking is linked to so many different types of cancer. Also, things like maintaining a healthy weight, trying to eat a balanced diet, lots of fruits and vegetables, whole grains, all that good stuff. And of course, protecting your skin from the sun.
It's funny, a lot of the things that are good for preventing cancer are also just good for our overall health.
It's true. It all comes down to making healthy choices, choices that support our bodies over the long term.
I think that's a great place to wrap up. This has been such an interesting deep dive. It's incredible how much is going on in every single cell in our bodies and how even the tiniest things can have such a huge impact on our health.
It really is amazing. And the more we understand about these complex processes, the better equipped we'll be to prevent and treat diseases like cancer.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And for our listeners, if you want to learn more about this, we highly recommend checking out the full article, Genetics, Cancer Cell Cycle Phases. It's a really fascinating read, even if we do say so ourselves. For the deep dive, I'm your host, and as always, stay curious.